tell me about your research and your knowledge about the economic benefits that rare birds can bring. How do rare birds bring economic benefit anywhere?
Yeah, let me just back up. Can I just back up a minute though so I kind of said this earlier. One of the differences in my opinion, between the hemispherical difference, Europe, North America, where some of my experience is, compared to somewhere like Australia, because you have this really strong migration and so many species migrate, there's many ways that a species can end up where it's not supposed to, right? So in Australia, there's such different, avifauna, and there's the nomadism is so high. So you get some rarities, but they're always like local rarities, So when I was in Sydney, I got really excited about an oriental cuckoo I found one time at East Lakes.
Yeah.
So this is a good bird. It's a rare bird, but it's also, you don't have, where you can go get them in Australia, or we'd get really excited about rufous and brown songlarks coming to the coast from inland, an hour or two inland. But again, you can drive an hour and a half and generally see them on the other side of the Blue Mountains.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Birding Today podcast, where birders come together to discuss the joy of birding. Now, some of you may not know, but my middle name is actually Thomas. So I've decided to go by Thomas now for the podcast, and also in life generally. I'm gonna go by my middle name, Thomas, just because it's a bit easier for people to say and spell, and I quite like Thomas. So call me Thomas from now on. The host of the Birding Today podcast. I want to start this episode with a listener shout out to Catherine Kirby, who wrote in wonderful email saying, "Thank you for producing your podcast, which I have been greatly enjoying. It is wonderful to hear a birding podcast on Australian birds. I appreciate your content and wide variety of birders that you get on the show. I am a relatively new birder, having started during the first lockdown in Wollongong. My bird that sparked my obsession was a powerful owl, which had taken up residence in a local reserve. I'm grateful that we have such a beautiful escarpment here with remnant rainforests, and the topography allows for a good variety of habitats for birds." Fabulous, Catherine. Thanks for writing in. Catherine is a health professional, and birding has been her sanctuary, which has helped her avoid major burnout during these past stressful COVID years. Again, thanks for writing in, Catherine. Great to have you with us. And if anyone else would like a shout out, just write to birdingtoday@gmail.com, and I can shout you out in the next episode. So let's get cracking on today's episode, which is going to be an exciting one and an international one, which I always love doing that. I want to sort of branch out into overseas birding as well, which we'll touch on today. So today's guest is currently a Postdoctoral Research Associate at the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research in Leipzig, Germany. He was first interested in the outdoors generally from a young age, growing up in rural Western New York State. Fabulous. When he went to do his undergraduate degree, he caught a passion for birding, which led him to move to Florida for a master's studying exotic purple swamp hens before receiving his PhD in urban ecology at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. We'll have loads to talk about. Adding to his bird list was a major motivation in moving to Australia for a PhD. He has been on many rare bird twitches and has often wondered about the potential of these rare events to generate funds or potential awareness of local birds. This is what led him down a research path focused on understanding the economic contributions of rare bird events. In his spare time, he is usually camping, hiking, or birding with his wife, dog, and toddler. So please welcome Corey Callaghan on the show. How are you doing, Corey? Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Good morning, or for me, good evening for you. I'm good.
Yeah, great to have you on the show, and thanks for tuning in. Indeed, so it's 9:30 a.m. for you at the moment, isn't it, in Germany?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Well, thanks for tuning in, and it's 5:30 p.m. for me. So glad we could find a window to connect. You were recommended to me by one of the listeners, Majin Petit, who attended a conference that you did a few years back about the rare bird phenomenon and how it can bring economic benefits. So it's going to be a great episode. But how are you doing?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I remember that conference. I can't remember where it was, but it was an ESA conference back in probably like 2017 or 2018. Yeah, it's going back a ways now. So I'm impressed that someone remembered that. makes me feel warm inside. So that's cool.
Yeah, well, it was great. So I really love having, like I said in the intro, sort of international guests, because the vast majority of guests on the podcast have been Australian based. So I'm
Yep.
really excited to have a discussion of maybe more international birding and how it compares to Australian birding. But the first,
Okay, I can have a crack at that.
I'm sure you'll do great. But sort of the core of the show is the joy of birding. So you've been a birder a long time, Corey. What is it that brings you joy in birding, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's just a couple of things, but one is the excitement of always seeing something, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're in a parking lot in the most urban part of like New York City, there's birds there, or if you're in like the most remote parts of Australia, there's still going to be birds there. So I think it's just this notion that there's always something to look for that gets me really excited, and just the pure kind of beauty of them as well. The aesthetics is very nice as well. And so, yeah, I guess those two things bring me joy. And as I've gotten older, another thing that brings me a lot of joy is showing people new birds. Even people that aren't into birding, just to say, like, actually those are 4 different species. They're not just one species of shorebird that you're looking at. And just taking that little bit of an education component to it, and that brings me a lot of joy as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, sharing the joy is a big part of it, definitely. And I think when you start to get a lot of knowledge about birds and birding, you also start to learn about their habitats and their movements, right? And sort of and their diet even. And so sharing that knowledge is really kind of a fundamental component of being a birder, I think. And so you mentioned New York State. So that's where you grew up, right?
Yeah, so I grew up in upstate New York. So I can never really say New York because everybody just thinks of New York.
Yeah.
And I did not grow up in the city, like it's like an 8-hour drive from New York City where I grew up. It's actually closer to Buffalo and Niagara Falls, so very close to the Canadian border. So that's where I grew up, on a little, piece of land in the country, farm country. And my parents were always outdoors people, my dad, hunting, fishing, this kind of outdoorsman, very typical American outdoorsman type thing. My mom had bird feeders, and there was a bird book. So, I knew the 10 to 30 species that kind of came to the bird feeder regularly. And I always thought that was cool when I was a kid, but then, and so then something switched, and I realized, you mentioned in your intro that, once I went to college, I was like, oh wow, there are so many more birds out there. And that's what really got me excited about birding as a whole.
Yeah, that sort of leads into the next topic that I had, which you've already touched on a little bit, which was what sparked your interest, because it's always, everyone has a slightly different story with how they got into birds and nature and birding specifically. So you mentioned like bird feeders, which is it's a very Northern Hemisphere thing, isn't it? You don't really have that down here. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not too Australian at all, bird feeders. And but that really wasn't my interest in birding. That was just kind of developing and keeping my interest in the outdoors kind of keen and motivated.
Yeah.
But then when I went to undergrad, I joined like an animal group club, and we did this like little trip, and it was like $200, I saved up for it. We went from New York all the way to California.
Wow.
And just the diversity of birds that I saw. And the trip was all about looking for birds and wildlife. And I was just blown away. And so then I came back, and unfortunately I came back in the winter time. This was like over winter break for like 5-6 days, came back to my parents' house for Christmas. And there's so few birds in winter time in parts of these Northern Hemisphere, because there's just so much snow. And but there was one bird. It was a short-eared owl, and it's a species that is more diurnal than most owls. It hunts dawn and dusk quite a bit more than some of the nocturnal species. And it was about 4 p.m, and I still remember just finding this bird and just watching it hunt and dive through the snow. And it was like one of these kind of Animal Planet moments. And it was absolutely the spark that was like, this is all I need. This, my life's changed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that was it. Yeah. Maybe that was too detailed of a story. I don't know if that was too detailed or not, but anyway.
No, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Like the moment, the moment that you kind of click and say, oh, this, like there's a whole world in this,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you touched on USA birding. So just to bring it back a bit, I've been to Florida way back in 2004, and I would have been 8 years old, but I was already into birds. I was quite young. I started being into birds, very as a small kid. And I've always been fascinated by US birding, like North American birding. I have my dad used to have David Sibley's guide with, I don't know if you're familiar with the edition with the red-tailed hawk, is it on the cover?
That's the one I used to have. Yeah.
Yep. So I used to leaf through that. And so tell me about US birding. What is it about US birding that makes it kind of a special place to go, a great country for a birder to visit?
Well, it's a massive country first, so it's hard to make sweeping statements, because it is so massive. But so I'll try to keep it general. But I think one of the main things, and this is also Northern Hemisphere, but it's just hopefully this is okay. But I'm making a direct comparison to my time in Australia, my birding time there, which was about 5 years that we lived in Australia.
Yeah.
And the one thing that, the US that I always missed was the migration.
Oh yeah.
It's that everything's so seasonally driven, and there's so many species that spend the Northern Hemisphere winter in the South America, Central America, parts of the Southern US for some, and then migrate all the way up to the boreal forests of Canada. And so it's predictable, so you always have something that's moving. So just now making it a little bit more local, where I started birding. If you take, I don't know, let's say from this is going to be not exact, so hopefully someone's not going to call me out on this, but mid-March till late May, like this migration starts, and every single week it's like a different group. So first waterfowl is coming through for the last 2 weeks of March, and then next thing you know, you got some sparrow, some early passerines, and then it all kind of builds up to this crescendo of early May, and you're just looking at wood warblers, New World warblers, and 20 species in a morning sometimes. And I remember when I was in undergrad, there was I'd have final exams, literally finals week, but it always coincided with like the peak of migration. And it was such a pain in the butt, because I'd be in my little local patch, and it'd be like a mega great day, and then I'm like checking I gotta go. Okay, 5 more minutes. I really gotta make this exam, and I'd be running to the classroom, and then as soon as I'm out of the exam, I'm back looking for birds, because it's like happens to be a great day. And yeah, so I guess the main point that I'm rambling about is migration. This is the one thing, that really is quite different. And yeah. And there's another thing that we'll talk about. So just for some foreshadowing, it is this notion of rarities. But we can circle back to that in a minute, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely circle back to that. But just on that difference, and I think it's more than differences between USA and Australian birding. It's definitely a hemispherical difference, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's the same in Europe. Like I come from Europe, and it's the same. In the winter, there's nothing left. When the higher north you go, the emptier it gets in winter.
Yeah.
And when the spring comes, it's like an event. And this is a question that I've just thought of now. Why do you think why is that? Why doesn't that happen in Australia? Is it just climatic, like the climate that dictates?
Yeah, it's just the biogeography. Yeah, it's just this weird biogeography, millions and millions of years of evolution that has allowed Australia to have this really unique, I can't remember the number, but it has an insane number of endemic species on the island that are found nowhere else. But if you go to the US, most of the species are found there's so many migrants that you don't have nearly as high percentages of endemics.
Yeah.
So it's many, many years of evolution that has led to these patterns that we see now.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, it's fascinating. And when you came to Australia as a birder, so firstly, why did you choose Australia? And secondly, what was the biggest birding shock that you got in Australia, if any?
The first one's easier. So I was doing my master's in Florida at the time, and this professor named Professor Richard Kingsford came over for a sabbatical, and we really hit it off. And he was a water bird guy, and I was doing my master's on water birds, but I knew I wanted to move into urban ecology, which is a lot of what my research is about.
Yeah.
And he said, "Are you interested in coming to Australia?" And I was hadn't considered it. And then, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, there's a lot of birds I haven't seen in Australia. I was young at the time, and I wasn't married yet. And so it was a massively life-changing thing, because I was like, all right, let's get married and move to Australia. And so we did, and we really enjoyed it. It was great. And I think I got up to about 580 species for my Australian list in the 4 or 5 years that I was there.
Wow, not bad. So
I can't remember the exact number.
So you traveled quite extensively within Australia as well.
Yeah, we hit every corner of New South Wales at least twice. And we did, Tasmania, quick trip to WA, Southwestern Australia, a trip up to tropical Queensland. We got all the kind of major regions in a short period of time when I was doing my PhD. And so the second question you asked was there a birding shock?
Yeah. Or like something that you noticed, like that you really kind of saw, oh, that's different than
so
for
I guess,
example.
Maybe I can borrow from my wife here, but she actually really misses Australian birding. And that's just mainly because of just the aesthetics of the birds, right? There's so many parrots, and so she's an SOB, spouse of birder. So she's not, I can get her to wear binoculars, and that keeps me happy. But let's put it this way, she could care less about the reed warblers that I'm looking for here in Germany. She wants to go back and look at the galahs and the cockatoos, and so this was a shock, just the pure beauty of so many species. And then the other thing from a more technical side of things was I always found the birds there to be quite easy to ID and find. Detectability is quite high for a lot of species. There's a few things like thornbills that are maybe difficult to detect or hard to identify if you don't get a good look. But in general, compared to the US and Germany, I found they were just a lot easier to find and identify. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
No, definitely. Like the visibility of the birds is.
The visibility, just, also, if you think a lot of the bush that you're in, a lot of time, there's, aside from some rainforest, but a lot of these woodlands, it's pretty open underneath, so you got speckled warblers. If they're around, you're probably going to see one if you look hard enough. Like this kind of thing. And there's a few birds that are tough to see, like whitbirds and this kind of thing, but just in general, I found this to be the case.
I touched on this in the last episode that I did, which is the lack of woodpeckers in Australia. And man, I love woodpeckers. They're one of my favorite families, and they're in Europe and North America and South America. But Australia is deprived of woodpeckers, and I really miss them.
So this is the Wallace's line. It's a biogeographic concept called Wallace's line, and it's basically this line that cuts off where woodpeckers are and nuthatches and a lot of these things. And you can Google it. I'm not an expert by any means, but it's it's a well-known biogeographic concept that keeps some of these really, really cool families out of Australia, or has kept from, evolutionarily speaking.
That's so interesting. So where is that line exactly, and why you said you're not an expert, but do you know why?
I'm not.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm just Googling it right now.
I love it.
It's from Java and Sulawesi, and
Yeah.
then anything right of that. So Sulawesi, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Island, Australia. Like these things are kind of to the right of Wallace's line.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a really good Wikipedia page. Here we go. I'll just read it out for the listeners. So the Wallace Line, or Wallace's Line, is a faunal boundary line drawn in 1859 by the British naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace and named by English biologist Thomas Henry Huxley, that separates the biogeographical realms of Asia and Wallacea, a transitional zone between Asia and Australia.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
that is kind of this line that people talk about that separates the woodpecker. Sorry, I feel like we're digressing, but anyway, this is a topic. Yeah, I love woodpeckers as well, so I fully understand your perspective there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And North America has some astoundingly beautiful woodpeckers. Oh,
Absolutely, yeah, it's good. Yeah,
just beautiful. Yeah. And like, okay, so shifting on to kind of the main topic that we were kind of aiming towards and that we referred to earlier.
That's birding, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the Birding Today podcast. Yeah, birding is the core.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I thought.
And so, but such a huge part of birding is looking for rare birds, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about your research and your knowledge about the economic benefits that rare birds can bring. How do rare birds bring economic benefit anywhere?
Yeah, let me just back up. Can I just back up a minute though so I kind of said this earlier. One of the differences in my opinion, between the hemispherical difference, Europe, North America, where some of my experiences compared to somewhere like Australia, because you have this really strong migration and so many species migrate, there's many ways that a species can end up where it's not supposed to, right? So in Australia, there's such different avifauna, and there's the nomadism is so high. So you get some rarities, but they're always like local rarities, So when I was in Sydney, I got really excited about an oriental cuckoo I found one time at East Lakes.
Yeah.
So this is a good bird. It's a rare bird, but it's also, you don't have, where you can go get them in Australia, or we'd get really excited about rufous and brown songlarks coming to the coast from inland, an hour or two inland. But again, you can drive an hour and a half and generally see them on the other side of the Blue Mountains.
Yeah.
So it's not that exciting. But what has it always been, and this isn't just me, I think this is one of the most exciting components of birding, is you just go out and you have this expected pool of species that you're probably going to see.
Yeah.
And then you have this pool of species like, oh, those are a bit, those are uncommon, but that's cool. But then you have this like tiny sliver of species that have never been seen before in that area, in that state or in that country. But they could turn up on any given day, depending on the weather patterns. And, so where I am in Germany, these are species from Asia or species from Southern Europe. If you have really strong winds, you can get these rarities. This is all a big lead up. I kind of already forgot your question. You just got me talking about rarities. But, this is just something that gets me excited personally about birding. Is just this idea of maybe there's a 0.05% chance, but there's still a chance that you find something that's just super incredibly rare.
Yeah, no, I see exactly what you mean. Yeah.
I guess this has always been a motivation for me. And, I found one of my first I found a few rarities in Florida, but one of them was the first state record of Pacific golden plover.
Oh, yeah.
So, ironically, this was when I knew I was coming to Australia, where Pacific golden plovers are the norm and the common ones.
Yeah.
And so a couple months before that, we found one, birding in Florida, and this happened to be the first state record. But going back, I can pinpoint your question about economics of rare birds. I can pinpoint the day that I went and this kind of twigged in my head a little bit. Literally it was just a typical Saturday, we went out grocery shopping. I remember getting back, putting the groceries away, and a friend calls me. They're like, Corey, there's a variegated flycatcher at Evergreen Cemetery. This is when we were in Fort Lauderdale, Florida area. And I'm like, variegated fly, like, are you sure? Like, there's photos, like, if you got photos, I'm always the Debbie Dowder kind of person. And you're like, yeah, like, I'm like, okay. So I'm, my wife and I, Diane, we packed the groceries away, jump in the car, and we're there 20 minutes later. And sure enough, we got some photos and, but we hung out for maybe 45 minutes. And in that 45 minutes, just watching this bird, probably 200 people came by, just 100 to 200 people just coming in and out like, oh, is the bird here? Yeah. Okay, cool. 5 minutes, chit chat, catch up with friends, and then they're on their way. It's people are busy on a Saturday, but they make the time. And
wow.
Yeah. And so it always kind of, and this was back in April of 20, I could look it up in my eBird lists, but let's say 2016, I think.
Yeah.
It's going back a ways. And it kind of, for whatever reason, I was just like, man, like these are massive events. Like, people come from everywhere. Because this is the thing. It's everybody from Fort Lauderdale, all the local birders. But 2-3 hours later, people from, all over Florida are coming. And then the next day, people are getting on planes and flying in and coming, it's that much of an event.
Yeah. So you think 200 people, 200, that's crazy.
Oh yeah, it was at least 100 and 150 just in like the afternoon it was first found.
Wow, fascinating.
But I didn't have any data on this, right? I didn't have any data at all. This was just me like thinking about it when the idea first started brewing.
Yeah.
And then, whatever, that idea is in the back of my head. I moved to Australia and I was on Facebook one day and I'm doing my PhD and then I see this black-backed oriole, and this bird is from Mexico. It was found in Pennsylvania, and at a backyard bird feeder. These people, they weren't birders per se, but they were the bird feeder type people, right? They had bird feeders. They knew all the birds on their bird feeders, and they see this oriole looks a little bit different. So they take a picture, put it on Facebook. Hey, what is this just a normal? What's going on here? Of course, someone writes back like, "Whoa, that's a black-backed oriole. This is like the first record for the USA. Can people come see it?" And they're like, "Sure," And the next day, you got I don't remember the numbers, but let's say another 100 people, 200 people just there, ready to see this bird. Just
wow,
overwhelming. But the cool thing about this is they actually kept a logbook, and so they, like as people came, they were really supposed to sign. Like that, one of the things that if you want to come visit this bird, hey, sign it. Like this is a crazy experience for people that, all of a sudden they're hosting people from all over the country.
Wow.
And so everybody signed, their names and where they came from. And I can't remember the details, but I heard about this on this Facebook page and I was like, this might be my chance to try to quantify this, like I can actually, because with this flycatcher in the cemetery, nobody's standing there keeping track, like nobody knows how many people are coming and going for this bird.
Yeah. But
this case there was. And so I reached out to somebody and then another somebody. And then next thing you know, a friend was sending scans of the logbook every week. And so I was getting all this cool data of where everybody was coming from. And then, then I had a study on my hands and I was just really, really excited about it.
That's incredible. It's so great to have that data. Like, and to loop back just before we get into the economical side of things. Listeners can correct me if I'm wrong, Australian listeners, but 150 people to see a rare bird, I don't think that would have, in one place and in one afternoon, I don't think that would have happened anywhere in Australia in birding history. 150 people on it.
It'd be tough. It would be tough, So yeah, I'm jumping ahead, but with the Aleutian Terns that I published a study on, we estimated only between 375 to 581 birders traveled to go see that bird. Within
a specific window of time, right?
Yeah, within what is the window of time? But kind of like that period that they were there the first year. So this is over a couple months.
Yeah.
So yeah, like absolutely, you wouldn't get 100 people in an afternoon because, well, Australia doesn't have the population density the U.S. does, and there's just not quite as many birders, I think, because of you don't have the population density.
Yeah. Is it only because of that? Like, I always love to think about why there's less birders here. Is it just because of population, or is there something else that play? Do you reckon?
No, I can't speculate. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's studies on this. I just don't know the numbers about this. A colleague in Australia named Rochelle Stephen, she's done a lot of stuff about like ecotourism, avatourism, more generally, not really about rare birds, but just generally speaking in Australia, quite specifically as well. So she would be the one that would have these numbers, and comparisons with other countries.
To bring it back to the Aleutian Terns as well, I had Liam Murphy on the show a while back.
Okay.
And so we talked about his discovery of the Aleutian Terns and how it was ID'd with a photo. And that was great to chat to him as well about how it was discovered. So if anyone listening wants to listen to that, it's I think it's in season two, episode 10. So go back and listen to that of how the Aleutian Terns were discovered. But so you used the Aleutian Tern as the rare bird to determine how the economic situation unfolded, right? What were your findings? How did you find the economy side of things?
Yeah, so first we did this with this Oriole case in the US that I was describing. So we published a paper on this, and we found that about $220,000 were generated from this event.
Wow.
And then then the Aleutian Terns were found kind of after that study was published. And I kind of thought, well, hey, maybe this is actually an opportunity to do a couple things, like test and see whether or not this is robust, was this just a fluke or anything, and also add to the study. And so with the Aleutian Terns, I literally tweaked our human ethics approval, because you need this kind of approval for this type of research. And they approved it. And we estimated between 200,000 and 360,000 AUD was kind of the number on this event. And we also added a question kind of, so you have this rare bird, nobody's actually charging people to go there, right? Like it's not even at a spot where there's a national park you have to pay to get in or anything like this. And so one of the questions well, is there any benefit for conservation, or can you make a benefit for conservation? So we asked people if they'd be willing to donate $5 or $10 or $20, how much would they be willing to donate to add this new bird on their list, essentially. And we estimated that about 30,000 AUD could have been kind of donated to a non-government organization to view the terms. If that, it was a very hypothetical case, but that was just an additional tweak we added to that study.
Right. Yeah. So the numbers, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that you referred to earlier about what this bird was bringing, what are we talking about exactly? Like travel, accommodation?
It's tricky. It's complicated, I'll be honest. So it's a lot of people, they immediately want to interpret it as like hundreds of thousands of dollars to that local economy. And it's not actually the case. It's kind of like, the method is used to value natural resources, right? And the only way you can actually one of the ways you can value natural resources is through how often and how willing people are to visit those natural resources. The tweak here is that these natural resources, rare birds, are fleeting, they're very unpredictable and fleeting. And so when we talk about these numbers, it's really just like the value of that natural resource, but in this case, it's an event. Yeah, does that but a lot of stuff is wrapped up in there, and the details are kind of in these studies, but you're talking about lodging, gas, accommodation, gas, food. I have friends in the US that I know that they used to do, I'm sidetracking here, I apologize, but just more about the local kind of benefits. One of the things that's really important to me is just to highlight the value of not the rare bird, but the habitat that can support a rare bird.
Okay.
Right. Like that's what's really, if you take this Aleutian Tern example, you have this pretty unique sandbar habitat up there. Like this is somewhat hard to find, this massive expansive sandbar throughout, much of coastal Australia. Like this is tough. And so we really need to think about everything we can do to preserve that type of habitat. Again, not necessarily for Aleutian Terns, but just for birds in general, and those shore birds and, nesting birds on the shore.
Yeah.
And so my motivation with this type of study is to say, okay, if this habitat exists, this is what's the potential here just for this one rare bird. And so that's kind of the thinking. I got sidetracked again, but what I was going to say is the importance of these types of habitats and birds to the local economy. I had friends that had business cards made, and it said something like, "We really enjoyed your establishment. We are in town visiting the, Rio Grande Valley, nature center," and they would just leave them when they ate at the cafe, so that the local business owners knew that natural resource, that Rio Grande Valley Nature Center, is giving them business. Those local business owners are getting business directly because people are visiting the nature. And it's a very grassroots way to make the general public aware of the value of habitat, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the rare bird, from the rare bird comes all of these ideas about conservation and habitat, right? So the rare bird is kind of the tip of the iceberg of the whole thing. And then if you're willing to look underwater at the rest of the iceberg, so to speak, you have all these different connections to, like you said, businesses and accommodation providers, and even things, I guess, like petrol stations, and you got to have the numbers. You got to have the numbers, right? Like I feel like in a country like the US, where there's so many birders, the impacts would be greater, wouldn't it? It'd be really visible.
I think so. If you scale it all up, yes. And people have done this. There are more general studies about the value of birders to the economy. What I'm doing is taking a very, very small slice of that and just a very unique instance, because it's something I'm interested in, and it's something that happens a lot, right? Especially in places like the US, like rare birds are seen all the time. We have so many more eyes and cameras now than we used to 10 years ago. That just stuff is being found more often.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the aspect of the economy and the revenue generating aspect of birding, I think it's not only about rare birds either. I think these tours, like I'm thinking about rock jumper tours, for example, worldwide. I can only imagine like the revenue and the cash flow for something like that, and like how that trickles down into wherever these tours go to. So
absolutely. And a lot of these places, in Southeast Asia and places like this, they rely on a lot of this ecotourism, and birders are a big part of the ecotourism, landscape. The one thing, if I can just add, about the numbers, is it always has given me a little bit of it's somewhat of a weird feeling to like say, hey, here's a number, like economically, here's a number. Because it's, there's so much more than just like, here's a number. But I guess, part of the motivation has always been, for better or worse, politicians, like they're dollars and cents people, right? Like these are people that they often don't care. I want to be careful here, too much about the aesthetic value of a rare bird. Okay. But if you can quantify the value of that rare bird and that habitat that it relies on, all of a sudden, I think you can get certain people's attention. So it's always been a bit weird. And then the other kind of caveat that I always like to mention is, people rightfully have asked me, well, hold on, how is this good for the environment? Because you have all these people flying to, from all over the country to go see this one rare bird. Like, this is horrible for the environment, as far as a carbon footprint. And absolutely, this is something that needs to be considered. This is at more of an individual level. And, I didn't really take that into account, but it's definitely something that can be part of future research. It's just a caveat I like to mention when I have the chance. Yeah,
for sure. And it's an important caveat as well, like that it's a fine line, between the value that a rare bird can bring economically and in terms of of awareness of a bird's habitat and conservation, and like you say, the carbon footprint, right? Like, I can imagine
it's a fine line, and there's there's pros and cons, and so you just have to think. You have to think carefully about what you're trying to say and when you're trying to say it and who you're talking to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of rare birds, this was another kind of topic, sidetracking again. into like
Yeah.
another discussion is you mentioned it before as well, eBird, right? So all these rare birds, like everyone knows about them straight away, you know. That's the situation now. What, you know, 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't the case, right? Like you had to wait. I know that in Australia we used to have, before eBird, there was Eremia. And so I had a good chat with Philip Peel, actually, a birder birder based in Melbourne. You know Philip.
Yeah.
And so he was talking about how it used to take so long to know about a rare bird that it was almost pointless, right? Because it took so long, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and before that, you had, when I first started birding, we had phone trees. Do you know what this is?
No.
So it's like your local bird club, they had a phone tree. So someone found a bird, you're in charge of calling the people that are on your branch of the tree, and then those people have to call people on their branch of the tree. And this was the way to get information out, right? This was literally phone calls. And then, but then texting was around. And so obviously texting made everything a lot easier. And then all of a sudden everything was on the internet. And
yeah. And
but yeah, eBird generally has just shifted our knowledge. I don't want to talk too much about eBird because I do that enough elsewhere, but
hey, this is amazing. This is the place to do it, man. Let's talk about eBird.
I guess my pitch to listeners is, if you're not using eBird, you should really consider using eBird.
Why is that?
For multiple reasons. I guess there's two. One is just like, for you as a birder, whether like regardless of your skill level, it's just amazing it's amazing tools to keep track of your list, to learn, to look at photos, to you get great feedback from the community. If you find a rare bird, people are going to quiz you on it and ask you politely, like, hey, are you sure it's this and not this other more common species? But then for my own, selfish reasons, is it's amazing data. It's data for conservationists. It's data for macroecologists. I use a lot of these data in many research projects. Sometimes a small component, sometimes the whole, all the data originate from eBird or other citizen science projects.
Yeah, what I love about eBird is on the eBird homepage here in Australia, even in the Australian homepage,
eBird Australia,
is that you get these animations, right? And so far, I think it's only in North America or the Americas that you can see the over time how the abundance and distribution of seasonal birds.
Absolutely.
It's incredible. It's so beautiful to see that.
Have you done
shift.
an eBird episode yet?
Well, I ask guests about eBird pretty much every time. So to get that difference in perception and difference in why they use eBird and why it's important to them, or why they don't use eBird also. And it's about volume though, like the volume of data that you get in, for example, North America in eBird must be leaps and bounds above the Australian data, right? Is that right?
It's a bit higher, but Australia is up there. It's in the top 5 or so usually. You got US, Canada, India has a lot of data. Taiwan has a lot of data. Australia is right up there. The UK, I would say 5 years ago, a lot of which, for those who don't know, like in my opinion, the most serious birders in the world are in the UK. They're British birders. This is just Google British. Yeah, too much to say about that. 5-6 years ago, quite a few, not that many people were using eBird, I would say. And now it's, to me, it's the norm there, because it's revolutionary. It's the best product out there for this type of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I personally use it. But yeah, if you ever wanted to do an eBird specific episode, Matt Gilfetter up in Queensland and Brisbane, he'd be great to reach out to.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I will do that. Yeah, give me the contacts when we finish this episode. Yeah, that'd be great. Always looking to expand. And like I said, I really like the like looping back shortly briefly to the rare bird economic benefits, just to close that discussion.
Yeah.
How rare does a bird actually have to be to generate that amount of money? If you see what I mean, it's a difficult question.
I do see what you mean. It's a really complicated question, and there's no real answer. I mean, take this oriole for example, right? So the oriole is a pretty common bird in Mexico, right? It's endemic to Mexico, but it's a pretty common bird.
Yeah.
But people still flew from Arizona to Pennsylvania to go see this species, right? Whereas it would have been a lot cheaper to go to Mexico, see the species, and then a bunch of other species, Mexican species, you know? So the point I'm trying to make here is that it's all based on context. Everything's based on context. You know, again, the example I mentioned earlier, Rufous songlark at East Lakes Golf Course in Sydney. This is where I used to bird all the time, me and my mate David Mitford. And, you know, I got a phone call, oh, songlark. I was there I left work. I was there 20 minutes earlier.
Wow.
I had seen the bird a bunch of times, but because it's a rarity at that site, so it's very, very context specific question.
Yeah.
But I think the larger the scale, so if it's a first record for Australia, like Aleutian Terns, then I think it's more likely you're going to get more interest in that species.
Yeah, no, that's
and
right.
Aleutian Terns is actually interesting because it's just rare in the whole, you know, it's just an uncommon bird in the whole world.
No, absolutely. And talking about these people in Arizona flying to Pennsylvania instead of going south to Mexico, the reason they don't go south to Mexico is because they want it on their USA lists, right? That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's this listing component, which I'm not against. I'm a lister too. So but it's an interesting mentality though. It's very, it's very interesting.
Yeah. So it's increasing our own personal collection, if you will, of birds in a given place. The same thing happened. The oriole has a kind of parallel here in Australia. I forget when exactly it was. Maybe it was a couple of years ago, I think. In Malakuta in eastern Victoria, there was not a pied monarch, a white-eared monarch. Which came down. They usually, I think it was the first record for the state, I believe. Again, listeners, please write in if I can be corrected, but it appeared in someone's garden, and the same thing happened. They posted it on one of the Malakuta birds or Victorian birds Facebook page, and this person wasn't a birder.
Yeah.
I mean, they were interested in birds. They were bird lovers.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yep.
And so it was like, oh, this is a strange bird. I haven't seen it before, and it was a white-eared monarch. And the whole birding community in Victoria was like, what? And so and I believe I should know more about this. I'm frustrated. I should have researched it more, but I think it was in the lockdowns during COVID.
Oh, okay.
Or was it the spectacled monarch? I don't remember. There was a spectacled monarch. Yeah, but my point is, it happens in Australia as well. Like, even though the biogeography is different and the seasonal variance of birds is different, happens everywhere in the world, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so that was just something I wanted to touch on, which is great. So, basically, do you have any other thoughts on that? Because I know the research that you did was a few years ago. It
was a few years ago.
Are you do you have an ongoing sort of project about this or thoughts about this, or do you want to maybe pick it back up again? Or
it's something I'll probably pick back up again at some point. There's a few kind of projects that I'm interested in. It's led me into more general interest of how people get engaged with the natural environment. And so this is kind of an increasing part of my research program. Rare birds was one really, really small case. And I'm thinking more about hey, when people use iNaturalist, are they using it for birds only, for everything? Are birds a gateway drug to the natural world? My biased opinion is yes, maybe. I definitely have some parallel research still ongoing, but not specific. These were, admittedly 2 case studies. As far as anything else to add, I guess the reason it's hard from a research perspective is that it's just so unpredictable, right? Rare birds are just so unpredictable, and you have something and they could be there for an hour and then never seen again. Or it can be there for 3 weeks or 3 months and everybody and their brother can go see it, So the unpredictability of it makes it really hard to study. Yeah, so that's the only other closing comment, I guess.
Yeah, it's so like, as soon as I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while. I wrote to you a while back, didn't I, with this?
Yeah, I think I said I was too busy or something. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's been
But
great.
no, I'm glad we made the time. It's good.
Shifting also to some more of your kind of personal birding and what you like about birding. What's it like in Germany for birds? What do you like? Firstly, how long have you been in Germany? And secondly, what's the birding like in Germany?
Yeah, so we got to Germany like about a year and a half ago, 7 or 8 months ago. And we got here pretty much in the middle of the pandemic. My wife and our dog and at the time my son was 3 months old, and today's his birthday, so he turns 2.
Oh,
so yeah,
fantastic!
There you go. Yeah. So so we got here then, and it was pre-pandemic, and so we were here. We had about a month or two of like freedom, and then we went into a pretty strict lockdown. And so because of that, I actually focused my birding and listing on the state that I live in, which is Saxony. And that turned out to be really fun. So I ended up seeing quite a few species in Saxony. I had never been to Europe, so a lot of stuff was still new and easy. I'm at the point now where I've seen most of the easy stuff. And so it's all about trying to find the tricky stuff. I just added boreal owl for my life list last weekend.
Nice.
This is, it's a really scarce breeder. Before that, it was gray partridge. There's probably 5 or 6 pairs in the entire state, and I managed to find one that I know where they kind of are, but dozens of tries, and I never saw one, but I was finally able to be successful. So it's good. It's definitely a lot of parallels to the US type, this whole phenology, migration, seasonality, and birding. We get a lot of waterfowl in the winter, and right now it's, June 10th. Mostly breeding birds. A lot of birds are already done breeding. They're feeding their young, so they're a lot harder to find because they're not singing anymore. I could go on and on, so you have to cut me off at some point. What was the question again?
Yeah, I love it. This is exactly why I host a podcast, to hear stories like that and perceptions that are different, because I love Australian birding, and Australian birds are incredible, and Australian birders are awesome. But I also really love to expand and get an international perspective, which I'm trying to do more with the podcast as well, and also how that compares to Australia and Australian birding. Is there anything that comes to mind when I ask you, what do you miss the most about Aussie birding?
The seabirds.
Oh yeah,
is one. And so seabirds is a major one. And the my wife misses it more, but I still miss some of the aesthetics and the parrots and just the eye-catching species that are, yellowtail black cockatoo flying past the apartment window. It's hard not to miss this. And then the other thing is, maybe this isn't what you're looking for, but and it's coming full circle to what I think the first question is, what do you enjoy about birding or something? And, one of the things I missed is some of my friends, some of my birding friends in Australia, my good mate, Dave Mitford, we talk every other day, like just about what we saw that day or whatever. And so, I guess my friends is another one. And this is another thing that brings me joy, is you make these friendships about a connection. And the one thing I find about, I don't know how I got on friends all of a sudden, but the one thing I find unique about birding friends compared to like other friend groups, and I'd be curious to have your listeners chime in to see if they know what I'm talking about here, but you can go like any amount of time without talking, and then it's still super easy to just like jump back into talking again. You can go 6 months without hearing from a friend. Yeah. But then because you have this like shared inherent connection and something that's so deep, that is birding, like it's really just seamless to just be like, oh, no way, you saw a tufted duck, great fun, it's just so easy. And I don't know. Anyway.
I absolutely see what you mean. Like the birding is such a deep passion that the two people who do have it, they, it's so easy to be friends and to connect even after a long time, like you said. And yeah, it's incredible how it brings people together, it really is. And even when you're out birding with a birding friend, you can spend, 20 minutes or half an hour waiting in the bush and not speak to each other and just listen, and just look for the birds, which is great. And this just very briefly leads me on to, do you speak German? Can you interact with other German?
I don't speak German.
So,
no.
So do you have any birding friends at the moment that you go out with regularly?
I have a couple that I wouldn't say regularly, but I drag a few people that speak English. I drag them along, but they're not like super keen. But then some of my, some of my good friends, they speak some Danglish, and so we get by. We get by. And on the friend note too, and this is just reminds me, a couple of weeks ago, I went with a friend for little owl, which is another rare bird in the region, and so this was a lifer, and it's about an hour and 20-minute drive down there with my friend, and it's hard to speak, because I don't speak German. He speaks a little bit of English. And so, but we still get by just by talking about different birds we've seen. And, and even if it takes a minute to figure out which species he's saying, it's like, oh yeah. I saw that one back when, and, in Thailand or whatever. And, it's really, really cool. And this just brings me to one other point about, I don't know why I'm talking about friends so much. Maybe who knows? But, with rare birds, like seeing the rare birds, the climax, don't get me wrong, but that 4-hour drive in the car and eating a bag of potato chips and stopping at gas station food because you don't have time to stop for dinner on the way there, like that to me is all part of the experience, and telling stories about birds you've seen. And like this is all for my own personal just interest in rare bird chases. Like this is all, I find this all very, very fun and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree. It's all about the, like you say, the rare bird is it's sort of the central aspect of the whole journey, but there is a whole journey around it, isn't there?
There is absolutely,
and it's really, really fun, especially to do that with friends or even family. Like I'm lucky that my dad is big into birding, and he's coming up to see me soon up here in Cairns. So just sharing that is excellent. So so we can start wrapping up now. It's been a fantastic episode, and I'm curious to hear from listeners about any thoughts you have on this. But so bringing it back down also to earth and kind of to your personal sort of birding journey. This is what I ask: what's your favorite bird?
This question's a tough one. Sorry, Thomas. I don't like this question because it changes. I mean, I guess some people just stick with a favorite bird, but me, it just changes. It changes by the week, by the day. A couple of my favorite birds, if you'll allow it, are, golden winged warbler, white hawk. This is a Central American species. Almost any kingfisher. I really like kingfishers.
Yeah.
Let's leave it at that for now. Yeah, those are some of my favorites.
Yeah, I'm the same. I can't commit to a single favorite bird. You just can't.
It's too tough.
Yeah. And what about, you've traveled extensively, so I could put this as a two-part question. Which birding destination has been the most amazing for you? And second part of the question, which birding destination that you haven't been to would you love to go to?
Yeah, the most amazing, it's hard to say. The last kind of international trip I did was in Sri Lanka with my wife, and we spent about 10 days in Sri Lanka, and that was really, really great birding. Just good diversity, a good number of species. I think they have 32 endemics on the island. Great local people, amazing cuisine, great culture. Like just everything about that was a great destination. As far as my dream destination is still Africa, just generally, Africa's been a dream for a while. So hopefully we'll get there someday.
Yeah, this is brilliant. We've got a lot of the same thoughts, actually. I've always thought that tropical Africa is shrouded in mystery, so inaccessible and alien to us, who live in these Western
Yeah.
countries, and tropical Africa just must be a dream, like the Congo, you know. What's hiding in the Congo rainforest? These wonderful birds, and I've got these. I don't know if you have them. The Handbook of the Birds of the World, by Lynx Editions. They've got kind of these.
I don't have a physical copy. No. This
I
is
mean,
part of the downfall of traveling all over the world is you're really reluctant to buy physical books because you have to then move them. And so,
yeah. No, that's right. And there's and it's all online now. Like
exactly.
The Macaulay Library and sort of the whole eBird phenomenon, again, talking about eBird, and the birdsoftheworld.org. It's so worth subscribing to that. I've got that, and it's so great to just quickly type in the bird. You get photos, media, audio, the whole kind of natural history of the bird, which is really good. So yeah. All right, well, that brings us kind of full circle back to the beginning and the joy of birds. It's been so great to have you on, Corey. Thanks for agreeing, and thanks to Magin for recommending you and attending your conference all those years ago.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for reaching out. It's always fun to dig back in the archives of stuff I did quite a few years ago now, and chat about it, and just birding in general. So yeah, as you can tell, I ramble a lot. So thanks a lot for having me on the show, Thomas. Really appreciate it.
No worries at all, Corey. It's been great, and if I may, I could kind of almost use you as a catalyst for recommendations of American birders maybe who are interested in Australia, that we can have that discussion about the differences and similarities. I'm really fascinated by that too. Yeah. So if you've got any suggestions, let me know, and we can get them on.
Sounds good.
All righty. All right. Happy birding. See you later. Bye.
All right, bye.
Thank you for listening to or watching this episode of the Birding Today podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to stay up to date with the show, you can follow me on all my social media platforms. And if you want to take it a step further and support the show and also get some cool benefits, you can support me on Patreon as well. So again, thank you for listening or watching, and I'll see you in the next one.